Years ago, I don't know how many of you are local and remember this announcement. Uber announced that they were buying the old Sears department store in downtown Oakland, right across the street actually from my apartment. So I was very interested in what was going in there. And moving a few thousand jobs there, and the community responded by protesting against the move. Now, I can't say that I was particularly surprised by this reaction, but it did strike me that we were seeing something new here, that this was a new phenomenon, that a community where, an economically depressed community where, in this case, the median income is about $25,000 a year, would rise up and say no to the most valuable privately held company in the world, announcing that they were bringing thousands of very good jobs to that city. And as someone who grew up outside of Detroit in the 80s, I can promise you that if a similar announcement had been made then and there, we would have been celebrating in the streets. So I started doing a lot of reflecting on how we had gotten to this place. Was there something unique to the tech industry that was driving this, or were these just bigger trends in the general economy? But most of all, what would need to change in order to get us out? What would need to happen for the community at large, and particularly communities that have been underinvested in for decades, to see a growing tech economy as creating opportunity for them? Now, obviously here in the Bay Area, the biggest reason that a growing tech economy is squeezing people out is, as we know, the housing crisis. But we also know that tech did not cause the housing crisis. These are obviously seeds that have been planted long ago, policy decisions that were made independent of the growth of the tech industry, exclusionary zoning, down zoning, as we heard in the last panel, Prop 13, the elimination of redevelopment funds here in California a few years ago. None of these things had anything to do with tech. But at the same time, the tech industry is, of course, the industry that is driving the boom here in the Bay Area. Since the beginning of this current boom, at the beginning of the decade, we have been creating many more jobs than units of housing. I think in San Francisco, this number is actually more like 8 to 1. And shocker, that has resulted in rising housing prices. So this is a graph, it's probably somewhat hard to see here, of the increase in rental prices for the 9 counties in the Bay Area. And that affordability shock has created literally a zero-sum situation where upper-income households are replacing middle and lower-income households at a one-to-one clip. And this is something the Turner Center has been doing some research on. So this graph, essentially here at the far right, households making over $150,000 a year. We've added about 19,000 of them. Meanwhile, about 19,000 middle and low-income households have left the region. This is for San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So this stark reality would be enough for any middle or lower-income residents to feel like, if a bunch of tech jobs are coming to my neighborhood, my clock is ticking. But when you couple these facts with the fact that the tech community hasn't really shown up to contribute to solutions around our shared problems, you start to see this really toxic civic dynamic that is undermining our ability to get to solutions that we need, that Senator Wiener talked about, the real political will we need to solve the housing crisis. And fairly or unfairly, everybody is looking at tech not just as the cause of the problem now, but as the enemy. They see tech workers getting on private shuttles, going off to their exclusive campuses where everything is provided for them, and not engaging, and they think they don't care about us. They're not in this with us. So ultimately, it became clear to us that if we were going to achieve our vision, where a growing tech economy is creating widespread opportunity for more people, and where the community is celebrating a tech company's arrival and thousands of jobs with it rather than protesting it, we couldn't just focus internally on the behavior change within the tech industry, although that is a necessary component. And we couldn't just do what tech people tend to do when faced with a problem, which is to write some code. We needed the tech community to collectively roll up its sleeves and come to the table to start working on public policy solutions to our shared problems. And so, and of course, we needed them to do that in partnership with others in the community who have been working on this for a long time, not take a go-it-alone approach. And so this is what we do at TechEquity. We are harnessing the civic power of the tech community. We are activating the rank and file tech workers across the region into a political force that can help accelerate the change we need in order for a tech economy to lift all boats. Now, this last line, if we show up, that when we started was a big if. Would they show up? And I felt reasonably confident that they would. David talked a little bit about my past experience. I've been organizing technologists to take part in civic projects for longer than just about literally anyone in the world. And so I knew that there was this untapped well of desire among the rank and file tech workers, not the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, although CZI is here and they are doing great work to help support this, but among the hundreds of thousands of people who work in this industry, many of whom who decided to work in this industry because they really did want to change the world. They want to see an industry that is contributing not to tech as a positive force in our economy and in our politics, but that is a different story. And so I knew I had this anecdotal sense that what folks in tech were thinking about, and I thought I was confident that they would show up because those are the circles that I run in and what I've seen. But I didn't really understand that sentiment deeply, so we did some research and we found some interesting things. The first thing I found really interesting was that when we asked people who work in tech, what do you think about tech's role in local issues? What emotions are you feeling? As you can see, the top emotions are frustration and shame and guilt. And this is a set of people who many of whom are new to the region. They don't understand the issues. They took a job somewhere, probably with lots of student debt, and took a job that they thought was going to be a great job working for a great company, and they get spit on when they're walking to work every day. They don't know why. They're deeply disempowered. They don't understand the issues, and they don't know how to get involved. But they do have a sense that they want to be part of the solution. Because of this, and this might be also, sorry for the small font, there is a strong sense from people who work in technology that tech workers have a responsibility to be civically engaged. And so all of our programming has been informed by this research, and we've done a lot to create these opportunities, these positive opportunities for tech workers to become engaged in civic conversations, and they've really answered the call. So we do a lot of brown bags at tech companies. This one happens to be at Pandora. We've done dozens of these. We did many of them before the June election and this week's election as well, with hundreds of tech workers on the job coming in to learn about what's on the ballot. We've also done this in their living rooms, where tech workers will invite us over to their house and bring some of their friends who also work in the industry, and we'll workshop. We'll either talk about some of the issues, help them understand policy, or do some of the voter education I talked about before. We're also getting them out in the streets. We were heavily involved in the Prop C campaign that just passed this week. Mark Benioff was obviously quite outspoken in his support, and there were several other tech leaders who were outspoken in their opposition. We wanted to be the voice for the rank and file people at those companies to really speak up and weigh in. And of course, we don't speak for everyone who works in tech, but there certainly is a strong voice of people in the tech industry who want to weigh in on topics like this. We're also really proud of the work that we're doing around Prop 13 reform. So we are now officially in the 2020 election cycle. I know you guys are excited about that. And we have qualified a ballot initiative for the 2020 ballot to reform Prop 13 to remove the commercial and industrial protections of Prop 13, which would bring about $10 billion a year into the state's revenue, and importantly, change some land use dynamics at the same time. We were heavily involved in the coalition to qualify it. This is one of our volunteers out on the street collecting one of the several thousand signatures that we gathered to qualify it, and we'll stay involved over the next 2 years to help get it passed. And we're planning to build on this momentum. In addition to continuing our work on the Prop 13 reform, we're going to be heavily involved in statewide legislation on hopefully on Senator Wiener's upzoning bill. on tenant protections, on identifying new funding streams for affordable housing, and we'll be pulling tech workers into all of that. And we're also, as David mentioned, we don't just work on housing, we're also expanding our work into workforce and labor issues. We obviously think it's really important that the tech community be involved in public policy, but we also see an opportunity to take that energy and turn it back on the industry itself. We think this newly organized political force, can influence corporate decision making. We've seen many examples since 2016 of tech workers speaking out, launching protests against their own companies. I think I just read this morning that 20% of Google's global workforce participated in the walkout last week to protest their handling of some sexual harassment cases. We've seen, protests against companies selling their software to the government. What happens when that energy is strategic, when it's focused on the economic impacts the companies are having, and when it's done at industry scale? So those are the kinds of questions we're asking now. I think it's really important for us, for tech workers, as they look at asking their companies to make changes, that they be sort of well-versed in how these issues play out in the community, which is why we think it's really important to do the public policy work at the same time. So that's another question we're thinking about is what are the housing-related things that we can build support for across the industry by activating tech workers to make the ask. So I want to leave you with Aaron. Aaron is a product designer at Uber. He came to an event we had a few months ago, which was a film screening about displacement in California. And he basically had a reflection that his experience of learning about displacement, about talking to people who had been displaced or who are at risk of being displaced, and the role that people who work in the tech industry can play in maybe preventing that displacement, really affected him. And it affected him not just as a citizen, but as a tech worker, and taking that sentiment back inside the company. And this sentiment from Aaron is something that we really want to scale across the industry. We think there are Aarons throughout the industry, across companies big and small, and that collectively they can have a lot of power. So ultimately, I think the impact that people in tech can have on housing and on every other economic issue that we're facing is not just to build an app, though that's great. I think the most powerful thing that they can do doesn't have anything to do with technology at all. It's actually just about showing up and learning how to use their power to advance positive change. Thank you.